Hi,
Hello,
everyone.
hello, everyone. You
Hmm.
have so many devoted fans out there. Look at this, so cool. They can't believe their eyes. They're talking with Hadar. It's really refreshing to see someone who's connecting so well with teachers and learners about pronunciation. There are a lot of people out there trying to do it, and they get people's attention because everybody wants to either improve their pronunciation if they're a learner or teach pronunciation in a
Right.
better way. But a lot of things I see are not really, hitting the mark. I think the way that you are. So I guess the first thing is just, when I started as a teacher, there was so much emphasis on phonetics and individual sounds. And, I couldn't believe how long it took me. Looking back, it wasn't that long. It was more like a year or two, but still, why was I for a couple of years focusing so much on individual sounds and not doing anything with rhythm, with stress and
Mm.
intonation? How does that happen? And why does that still happen
Yeah.
today? Because this was 25 years ago. Let me let some people in here. So,
I'm letting them in as we
yeah, thank you.
speak.
Me too. Yeah, we
Yeah.
can't let them in fast enough. So I just feel like, to me, like the no-brainer part of it, of course, this is after, having more experience, but just, once you learn that sounds in English, because it's a stress time language, change their sound, like they reduce, they link. Why would you ever start with the sounds when you need to start? Again, this is my opinion, we can talk about it, with the rhythm, and that's sort of the
Yeah.
gateway into the sounds, as opposed to starting with sounds and then having to come back there and be like, oh, by the way, this is actually usually a schwa.
Yeah.
Because it reduces, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
As if, I guess it's maybe because we want to kind of always put things in boxes, like, we want to know like right and wrong, like this is this
Yes.
sound, this is that sound, this is the sound spelling relationship. And then, but I feel like, wait, then later it's like all the exceptions. Why don't you, if you start with rhythm, you can really see how it works in English, as opposed to a language like Spanish, where you learn a letter, you learn a sound, it's pretty
Right.
much a direct
Yeah.
relationship. Just what's your experience with that?
Wow. Everything that you said resonates with me so much because I've put a lot of thought into it, both in terms of what is really important for the students and also how can I build trust with them that gradually they will be willing to learn things that are not that clear, and trust me that it will be. And I think this is where prosody comes to play because pronunciation, like you said, it's like boxes. It's really clear. It's almost, I always say that pronunciation is the science of speaking and prosody is the art of speaking.
Oh, I love that.
And in science, it's really clear. You do this with your tongue, that with your lips, you open your mouth this wide, and that's it, right? Like you get the sound. Of course, it's not that simple, but absolutely, like it's easier to explain and it's easier for people to perceive it. You can grasp it, you can see it, you can visualize it. And I think this is why people tend to start with that or work with that or just focus only on that because there is right and wrong. People are so obsessed
Yeah, like
with right
grammar, same
and
thing. Like
wrong.
let's learn a
Yes.
grammar rule that has no exception, because I feel more comfortable with that.
Right. So there is no confusion, there is no ambiguity, and then it's a lot easier to know that you're on the right track. And when it starts getting all, you can do this, but you can also do that, and that is okay, but that is okay as well. People are really afraid of that. They need to build confidence in the language to be able to do that. But at the same time, even teaching pronunciation is a lot easier once they understand the rhythm, once they
Right.
understand that not all sounds are important, but the sounds in the primary stress of a word that is also stressed in a sentence, right? So it's not like, also when you think of the importance of clarity and how you pronounce things, it's not all the sounds need to be clear. It's, you have to understand how they're organized in a sentence
Right.
to be able to focus on what really matters.
Right. And I'm even thinking more in terms of young learners, get it in early. So it's something that's just,
Yeah.
subconscious, like just amazing to see how many well, I mean, I almost never see it. Like dialogues in books won't have, the word and sentence stress marked. I mean, I mark everything I do.
Same here.
With it's because you have to visually to see it to get it. So like, how could you possibly teach something like, I like listening to music without, I like listening to music, without, if you're not going to teach the shrinking and linking, as I call it, the reducing connected speech, fine. With kids, you don't have, but why wouldn't you get that practice with it so that when they hear it, their brain can connect with it? And then then we say, okay, well, that's kids, but yeah, the adults, it's even more important then, like that they, raise their awareness of that, as opposed to like, how to make the TH or whatever. Not that that isn't important, but I think, and this is getting to where I want to go with this, in most cases, as we all know, communication, usually the problem is not a specific sound, right? It's because it's either the message is misunderstood because the stress is wrong, or the feeling of the person is misunderstood because the intonation was wrong. So it's like, if we know that prosody is the main thing that interferes with people understanding you, and we know that intonation, lack of intonation or the wrong intonation affects people's perceptions of you, why are we stuck on individual sounds?
I know. And I think it has to do with the fact that people haven't figured out a way to teach it effectively, and people are insecure in teaching that, because again, there are so many, I can think of so many limiting beliefs that teachers might have. I don't have a rhythm, like a sense of rhythm. I don't understand.
Well, that's valid, isn't it? Because when I train teachers, if their first language is in English, that's a very valid point. They're like, wow, I love that you mark the stress, because I need it myself, because my language is not stress times. And it's like, that really helps me. So yeah, I think that is a valid point. Right.
And I also think that I'm going to support what you say about rhythm, because and again, it's like the art and science, right? When you think of pronunciation or grammar or vocabulary, everything that you can perceive is like the intellectual part of the language. But there is so much to a language than the intellectual part. You have to feel it, and you have to develop intuition.
Yeah.
Right. And the way for you to develop intuition, it definitely connects with rhythm, right? You got to feel it in your body. You got to that's how it is in our first language. Every language has its rhythm. It's just not aligned. Like, it's not the same rhythm.
Well, every language has its rhythm, but there is something very, very unusual about the stress time nature of English, more than a stress time language like German. It's still like, it's so stress timed. It's just, so just to give an example for people out there, and then Hadar, if you want to give an example too, just like, when I was teaching in New York City for years, the problems with communication that students would come back with, where they thought like, I guess they didn't understand me because I was saying Port Authority, but I guess I said Port Authority. And then it turns out, of course, the reason that the cab driver didn't understand was because they said they want to go to Port Authority. Port Authority. So it's not about their R in port or their TH in authority. It's because they would say Port Authority, Port Authority. They could have even said like, and the person would have understood, the fact that the word stress was wrong,
right,
made it impossible to be understood.
I think I had the same experience when I was in school, and I still did not grasp the sounds and rhythm of English. And I remember I had issues with 13 and 30. It's all about the rhythm, right? All about the stress, and the pronunciation is pretty similar, maybe the flap T, but still, like, if you don't, the T doesn't matter. What matters is where you put the stress. And also, there is so much that goes into it, like tone of voice and attitude, and like being perceived as aggressive or soft spoken.
I want to talk to you about like stress, rhythm versus intonation, melody, and the difference there in a moment, because that's, to me, one of the most important things that new teachers need to really understand, because I hear so many teachers mixing them together, and they're really so different, or saying like, reduced and linked speech is, street talk, or like it's,
that is so wrong. And then,
but it takes about, 23 seconds when I'm with teachers for them to figure out its intonation. that changes the appropriateness, that changes the register, not the rhythm. The rhythm stays the same, and they're easy examples that you can use to help teachers and students figure that out. But I just wanted to first, I think I lost my train of thought, so maybe I'll come back to that and just go right into this. I mean, when you're saying like that it's about the attitude and it's about the rhythm, they really are different. I mean, if it's so, like, for example, if we're talking to my boss and I ask my boss, what are you planning to do for the weekend, right? I wouldn't say, to be polite, what are you planning to do for the weekend, right? The rhythm is the same. I mean, so with a friend or my boss, the word stress will be the same.
Right.
It doesn't change. The rhythm of English doesn't change. What changes is intonation, emphasis, pitch, all of that. But, we don't alter the rhythm.
The rhythm doesn't change.
So it's
unless you choose to stress a different word for some reason.
And this is exactly what I wanted to talk about. So this is where I think it gets confusing, because you said, and I'm not saying you're wrong unless you want to stress a different word. But when I talk about with students, I talk about it as intonation. Because to me, stress is the rhythm. But it's true. Like, if you put emphasis on a word, it can be stress, but it's not.
Well, generally, would you agree that usually when you stress a word, it is longer, right?
Yes.
And there is a change in pitch. Could be higher or lower, but there is a change in pitch. So you do, like, I do feel that and sometimes you just might go a little louder and not change the pitch.
Well,
So there is, like, that's how you create versatility.
So let's take an example for anyone who's losing what we're not following what we're talking about. So if I'm continuing with that example, so if I'm talking to my boss, and it's sort of he or she is like, over here. So I'm going to say maybe, so, okay, so, what are you planning to do next weekend, right? So it's like, what, plan, do, weekend. We know the words that are most important to convey the message are carrying the stress. This is the good news about the stress kind nature of English. So if you're listening, you want to listen for those words, right? For fluent listening. The only problem, of course, is if you want to speak or write, you can't say what, plan, do, weekend. You sound like a caveman or woman. And that's where accuracy comes in, why we need grammar. So it's that balance, right, of fluent listening for the stressed words, not chasing all the little grammar words, but then when you speak, you need those function words in order to communicate things accurately, right?
No, but that's why I always say that you can mess up those function words. Like, if you do, nothing happens really, because people skim through them anyway when they're listening or when they're speaking.
It all depends on what you're doing.
On an ad, which is legit, right? But also they're so reduced sometimes that it doesn't matter so much as long as it's the right word.
Doesn't unless you're giving a presentation or you're writing a cover.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? And if you ignore them all the time in order to be fluent, then you can have problems with fossilization, other things. However, and this, I definitely, don't let me start talking about this, I don't think that that's going to be as much of a problem with AI coming in, where we're going to, in a formal situation, be able to translate, put things in so we can keep communicating about the meaning and not have to worry about the function word. But that's something else entirely. But the thing is, like, if I'm talking to my friend, I'm going to say the same thing. What are you planning to do next weekend? The only thing that's going to change, right, is I'm not going to use the same intonation because it's my friend. So with my boss, it's going to be, so, I'm a man, but I'm like, so what are you planning to do next weekend? Ms. Johnson, or whatever, but with my friend, I'd be like, hey man, so what are you planning to do?
What are you planning?
Right. And so what I think, tell me what you think, but in my experience, even
here, there was a shift in pitch, right?
No, completely pitch, but not rhythm.
Rhythm is the same.
That's it. So what I'm saying is what I find when I train teachers, and tell me if you have the same experience, is that there's kind of this way of thinking about them together, which is, to me, completely not a good idea, because the whole point is one of them is about rhythm, and that's not about register and appropriateness and feeling. And one is about intonation, pitch, and that changes everything. So with my friend, I might be talking on the phone like, hey man, what's going on? Yeah, cool. All right, cool. Yeah, all right, I'll see you next week. Okay, bye. Right. And people are like, oh, English really doesn't have a lot of intonation. It's like, Romanian or something. But it's like, wait a second, that was my friend. when I'm talking to my boss, hey, so, and the more polite you are and the more, it's like, do you think
Higher
I might
pitch.
be able to borrow
Right.
your car on Friday night? Like, I'm a man, but it's like, do you think I could probably, without, my
Yeah.
voice is going to just high tone and
Right.
lots of up and down. And what I see is intonation being taught to talk about like, no, not are you cold? Do you have a cold? Not John, but Mary. And it's like, wait a second. That's not as important. I mean, it's important intonation, pitch change, whether you call it stress or not, anyway, for contrast, new information. But how could you not focus on the most important thing, which is like people thinking, are you bored or interested? Are you happy? Are you sad? Are you aggressive? Are you not,
Right.
to me, that I just don't, anyway. So
no,
I feel like, again, and I'll let you go, but like rhythm, without the right rhythm, you're not going to be understood a lot of the time, the message, and without the right intonation, they're going to misunderstand who you are and how you feel. And to me, those are much more important than individual sounds.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. And I think, one more thing that we didn't talk about that is really important. You gave the example, well, if I'm trying to be polite, will I say it like that? Right. So sometimes even if they may, if people might use reductions, they might still separate words just to be clear, or just as a habit of, because maybe in their first language, you cannot connect a lot of clusters together. And then as a result, they might disconnect words. And I think that affects clarity as well. But that's a different thing. I just wanted to add that I think it's connected. But here's like, I was trained as an actress, and I feel that sometimes the way I see it, very similar to you, but I think that first of all, there is the content, right? Like what you're trying to say. There is the message that you're trying to deliver. And within that message, there are your thoughts that you form, and a thought is usually comprised of units that is led by like one keyword that you're
thought groups, right?
Yes, exactly. And both rhythm and intonation serve the content. So we're using both to serve the content. Now, sometimes you might use both at the same time. Hi, how are you? Right. And sometimes you might just use rhythm. Hey, how are you? But still, even if you just put more focus on rhythm, focus in speaking now, and like as we're analyzing it, there's still going to be a lift in pitch, right? Even if you stress something, there is still going to be a slight lift in pitch, even if you say, oh, I'm super, I'm monotone. No, there is, like, you'll see variation. So ultimately, pitch and rhythm, right? Like length and difference in pitch indicates stress. And I think it's really what you're saying. And then you add to that.
No, you're right. Yeah.
You add to that tone of voice, or, how you use your intonation, which affects the attitude, or, the level of friendliness that you have, or what you're trying to get ultimately. And I think that it's easier to start. I don't know. And I honestly don't know. And I would love to hear from you if separating it completely is the best thing, because people still perceive it. Like they need to make sense in their head what they're hearing as a learner. Maybe as a teacher, it's a little different, a teacher who's also native to that language. But as a learner, you also need to make sense of all these different aspects, because you don't know how to control your rhythm. You don't know how to change your pitch unless you isolate it and you understand when to use that.
Yeah. Well, what I'll say is, I mean, I've used lots of different techniques, some that have worked better than others, but in the end, for the last, I don't know, for many years now, I've realized the best way is just giving students practice to just do it, so I wrote like songs to do it, where if I show the stress and they enjoy the song, they're reading the lyrics, they're repeating it, it just happens naturally. They acquire it. There's no learning. It's acquisition. It's subconscious. It's, it's very crashing. It's reading and listening together. It's definitely, and I find this is true in French as well. Not the same as Spanish or Japanese or something as much, or Korean's even better example, where the sound spelling relationship is just equal pretty much. I mean, equal is the wrong word, right? But like French and English, you can see a word in French and there might be 9 ways it could be pronounced, right? That's not the same in every language, right? So I
Right.
feel like with English, like, lyrics, scripts, subtitles, if you can hear while you see, then you're not thinking, how do I say, how do I write, as much as it just happens naturally with
Right.
enough practice.
Like you will acquire, a language naturally. Like we really want to bring it back to how we acquire it as kids, as
Mhm.
infants, right? And I
Exposure,
think
lots
that
of exposure and practice.
exposure, listening,
Right,
repetition,
right.
and
And
I think
fun
that the
and
way,
intrinsic
yeah,
motivation. Not I have to do this to learn English, but like I want to do something else, and to do it,
right,
English is going to come along on the way.
and the way it's taught currently, like starting with spelling, and then like the grammar rules and all of that, it really goes against how a language is acquired naturally. And I
Mm,
really do feel that there is a gap here that people throughout the years really try to bridge. And then we come in and we do this thing with intonation and rhythm and stress. But you're right. Like if we could catch it from the beginning, if we were to teach it, when people are exposed to English for the first time
mm,
through repetitions
mm.
and practice instead of learning the alphabet, I think it would be so much more beneficial, both for rhythm,
Yeah, yeah, for all of
and
it.
pronunciation as well, because
Yeah,
it's so much easier to pick up on sounds when you don't have to connect them to words.
that's right. And I love examples like when I do my shows with kids, like we do a thing with rhyme where I put words that have different spellings up, so it's like, sir, were, her, right? And
Right.
they're repeating with me, and then we get to, so, no, go, and there's do. I say do, and we start laughing, and they're like, it's not do, it's do. But then why?
Right.
Right? Why do they know that? And it comes down to
Yeah.
because do is so frequent.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you don't know that THOUGH is though, it's because you haven't heard and seen it together enough, period.
Right.
It's not that certain words are necessarily harder than others. Like there's all kinds of weirdness going on with the common words, but nobody thinks it's weird because we hear them and see them so much. We're pronouncing them fine. They're
Right.
exceptions, but more as just like other words are exceptions. But it's about how often you see them and hear them, to know what sounds right and what looks right. Right.
So I have a question for you.
Okay.
How do you see the transition from the practice to the real life speech?
Mm.
And do you create something that helps them be more intentional about
Oh yeah,
their speaking?
I see. Yeah, I mean, almost, and this is more like just what I do, but I'm happy to talk about it. I mean,
Yeah.
almost everything that I've talked about today and what I do is not done in the classroom. So this is how I flipped the classroom from the beginning. So like listening to songs, doing audiobooks, doing videos with subtitles. This is the fun practice to get at home. So in the classroom, it's about applying it. Right? Because the whole problem is how can you possibly succeed in a communicative activity when you're like checking the book, looking at the board, translating. So it's more like, all of that's outside. And furthermore, time in class is precious. It's not about repetition and practice. So,
Right.
I mean, when you think about anything else, it's like that. You practice a sport, you practice an instrument, you do all of that, then you join like the group, that's done outside of class.
Yeah.
So then it's like, yeah, so whatever the goal is it TOEIC? Is it giving a presentation? Is it, job interview? Is it, you're going to travel abroad as a kid and you need to get ready to make friends? I mean, whatever it is. But see, then to me, it's like if they've done enough practice and they've enjoyed it enough, then they're going to just naturally be motivated and use it.
Right.
And along the way, like I can help them with their accuracy, and other students can give feedback and everything else.
And I really think that's a big part of it, like making it fun and creating a non-judgmental environment for them, especially at a younger age. I work a lot with adults who have already created a lot of who have a lot of limitations and baggage and insecurities around language because of their past, because of their history, because of learning it the wrong way from the get-go, or not even learning it properly. And I think that it's so important because when you create that free, fun experience, then whenever they do encounter a difficulty, it's not going to pose a challenge. It's not going to stop them. They're going to know how to handle it.
That's
and
right.
that's what we want for our students ultimately.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm just keeping my eye on the time. Yeah, let's go for another 10 minutes, then get questions, because I have a feeling we're going to get some really good ones. I
Yeah.
want to ask you something just out of curiosity, because I've never asked someone with your experience in this, just your opinion. Something I talk to students a lot about when I explain rhythm, especially adults, especially. But in a linguistics course many years ago at City University in New York, I had this wonderful applied linguistics teacher who explained that, and this is what I've never seen it explained this way anywhere else, so I don't know if it's true or if she made it up, that the reason English has this stress time rhythm is because, and you may or may not know this yourself, I'm just curious what you think, that because it came from, it's German, the grammar is more Germanic, the vocabulary is more Latin through French and other languages, but that, German had all these cases, all these endings. So the word movement in the sentence, was very free. And then English used to be like that also, right? So because a word had a case on it, you could move it. You could put the verb here or there, you could put the subject or the object. It had a lot of more movement to it. I know that that's true. So what she's saying is that English lost its cases, which is also true. And when it lost them, it became this subject, verb, object language. Like it became this very fixed order language where there are very few exceptions, right? There's passive voice, there's question, there's, negative inversion, right? We see where it changes, but compared to most languages, it's really fixed. Right. And then it's that fixed, that subject, verb, object, right?
Right.
Like, so if you do something like, students play music, the students play the music, the students have played the music, all the way up to the students will have been playing, right? The rhythm never changes. The rhythm is on subject, verb, object, or complement, if you will. Have you ever heard that as an explanation of
No, I've never heard that. But that actually makes sense.
Doesn't it?
Yeah, it makes sense. And I don't know, it's really interesting. It reminded me of I fell in love with rhythm when I was in, again, acting school, and I was obsessed with Shakespeare. And, Shakespearean language is written in iambic pentameter. And then you really understand so much about the rhythm of English while working on those texts. And this is how I got to learn it, like how it all, it's ultimately, it's very, there's a lot of repetition. You can expect a rhythm of something no matter what you're speaking. And then I started noticing it happening, this iambic feel in people in contemporary speech as well. And I think that, it's not related really to what you said, because, I don't, but I feel like, whether it's Old English or contemporary English, I feel like the rhythm plays a significant role in delivering any message. And, and I think that you can really learn so much about what a person is saying if you're only listening to their message and to the rhythm, like only paying attention to their rhythm. So yeah, I think it's, and thinking about my studies at the university and also in acting school, I was not taught all of that. It was all about sounds, none of that. And you're right. Like, I think there is either not enough practical theory, like theory that you can put into practice and teach it. I mean, you have, how you teach it and you pass it along to other teachers, but I wonder why it's not that common in classrooms.
Yeah. And when you see it, I mean, then there are also teachers that, okay, so then there are issues, of course, with, I feel, teachers not teaching rhythm and prosody and intonation, prosody as the whole category, or doing it in ways where they're kind of focusing on areas that aren't as important. But then another thing I feel as important is, like, even if you have all of the knowledge as a teacher, does that mean that you teach your students that? Like, so, so let's go to adults.
Right.
So maybe no one would do it with kids, but even adults, like, there's raising awareness. And then there's getting people like under the microscope on the language. If they're not going to be an applied linguist or an English as a second language teacher, is it really, is that what you want? Should they be analyzing so much how things work? Because, other skills, we don't do that. I mean, you can learn dance, trumpet, tennis without looking at exactly
every aspect.
how a bicycle works is not how you learn to ride a bike, right?
Right.
So if it interferes with acquisition, which we know it can, right? And
Right.
we want to answer adults questions if they're curious about how it works, right? But again, my experience with adults is the more they just get practice, shadowing their favorite actors, doing songs. I wrote this audio book called One Day where I highlight all the stress, and I offer, different patterns. I'm not saying what they are, but I just make sure they're there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So if you have something like, like, I don't know, a pattern with let's talk about it, let's go, let's eat, let's whatever, instead of saying, notice where the stress is, or, if you give them enough fun practice in a game, for example, with something like that, they're going to internalize, I feel.
I agree 100%. Like, I think repetition is really important, but I also think that from my experience, when they have the vocabulary, not real vocabulary, but like they understand the concept or the words to use to describe what they're hearing. I do think that a lot of times it does help them make sense of things, because usually people who get to dive deep and to learn more about English and intonation and rhythm and stress and prosody and all of that are people who already have, from my experience, a pretty vast experience in learning English, but there is something missing. Like, they can't put it together. They hear it, but they don't know how to translate it to yeah, exactly. So even if they imitate someone, it would still sound different, right? They would hear one thing and then they would say it, and then it's not the same. So what do they do then?
I see what you're saying. Totally. And I think you're absolutely right. And I think with kids, it's different. And that's why I just always go back to kids, and it's like, why aren't we just getting kids to do all these things?
Right.
Like, it's just like,
it needs to be changed completely how kids are taught.
Yeah. Like, I mean, I'm in France, and it's funny because France and Morocco, I was going to use them as an example, and they're in the World Cup, but like a perfect example is, in Morocco, at the middle school level, the kids are all going to English clubs, and not everywhere. Okay. It depends on how much money you have and everything else. Okay. But let's just say, like, I'm just comparing like sort of equal situation in a French school and a Moroccan school. So you have like a middle school in France, in Morocco, where, because they learn it in primary school, when they're in middle school, they're doing like English clubs and theater and English and stuff.
Right.
And the curriculum at the middle school level is they're able to actually do it. Like, it's stuff that's not just fundamentals of grammar and vocabulary. It's amazing. And so in France, at the middle school level, same really cool curriculum about, like, applying stuff, right? Not just, but guess what? The middle school kids can't do those cool lessons because they don't have the base of grammar and vocabulary.
Wow.
So it's like, what do you do? Like, it's not good to have a syllabus that's all about just teaching grammar and vocabulary. But when you're 14, right, you're not going to do some cool lesson that involves you applying something you don't have.
Yeah.
You're going to get bored, turned off, and everything else. So, it's I feel like it's great to talk about all of this stuff later, but wouldn't it be even better if kids were, just getting, and we see in Scandinavia, kids watching TV and stuff in those countries that just, without thinking about it, they acquire English a lot of the time. So, but I think we need to start, because you and I love to talk, which is good and bad, right? Maybe
so let's see if we have a question, because there is the game in like 20 minutes.
Right. And we are going to talk, because we're not turning people's mics on, but we're going to stop and we're going to say, hey, good people out there, and there are a bunch of you. Wow, nearly 100 people. Do you have questions about anything we've talked about, anything we haven't talked about? I have a feeling, Hadar, some of these questions will be like, Hadar, like, what's your favorite color? And I just love how you do that. Which is okay too, but questions about pronunciation, either learning it or teaching it, would be great.
Yeah.
I want to throw those in.
Yeah, really, Nadia says I always sound different when I'm trying to do shadowing. I think
that's what your point is. Yeah, maybe that's something I haven't thought about enough. Maybe I need to think about that more.
it's like sometimes you have to develop the skills of knowing how to shadow or like what to focus on,
Mm,
because when I say something to my daughters, they don't speak English is not their native language, and when I say that, they imitate me quickly, and it's easy to pick up on it because they don't have ideas about how it needs to sound or a lot of habits and
yeah.
like pronunciation habits in English. But for adults, there's a lot that gets in the way, and this is why sometimes I think like dismantling everything and then
Yeah.
putting it back together, building the confidence
Yeah.
in
It
being
can
able
be
to do
important.
it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
I
it
get it.
really depends on the learner. For
Yeah.
other people, it might be just like, let's just
And their
imitate and I'll
yeah,
get it.
their personality, their experience learning English, good and bad. We have one of my favorite questions here. I'm so glad someone put it. How important is it to learn
Yeah.
IPA,
Great
International
question.
Phonetic Alphabet, to pronounce accurately? And I think that maybe depends on the learner and how you go about it. But do you have a general feeling, good or bad?
I try to make the language accessible, and I feel like teaching them one more thing is not always the best thing. So, yeah, it depends. If someone is very analytical and needs to have things organized in their brain, I would teach them IPA, let's say teach them one on one. But
Mm,
generally, no, I would just like create loose transcription, like use the language that they already
right.
know, assuming that they come from like a more phonetic language, and then would write it in a way that is more intuitive than
Yeah.
IPA. That's what I do.
That's how I feel too. But meanwhile, look at the comments. IPA helps me a lot. IPA is great. Learners.
Afterwards, I think after you understand the sounds or like you build
Yeah.
confidence,
Okay.
maybe
Maybe
then,
that's what. Yeah. Right. But
yeah.
not as something as a way to. I mean, so the question wasn't about when, where, how to use it. It was, do we need to learn it? So I guess you definitely don't need it. That is super clear. I mean, if I had to think of or go back into my notes of learners who really their pronunciation just became just what they wanted it to become, it wasn't IPA that got them there. That doesn't mean that it didn't help them along the way. But if the question is to me, like, do you need to know it to pronounce well? No.
You don't need to know it. And it's a tool that some people might find helpful, more
Mm,
helpful than others.
right.
Some might feel limited by it. So this is
Mhm.
why, yeah, I agree with you.
Good. Okay. Well, let's keep the questions coming. Here's a good one. What are the main skills needed to teach English? How do you really translate prosody to our daily speaking? Okay, lots of good
Mm.
questions. I'll let you pick up the question you feel like picking up. Um, okay, how does vowel and consonant IPA chart? So is that what you were referring to? You sort of have like an IPA chart where you're also adjusting it a little bit to make it more accessible? Is that what
No,
that
I
is?
do both. I do
Okay.
both. So there is when I teach, let's say when I talk about all the vowels of English and compare them to the vowels in their native language, which is usually what I do, right? Compare
Okay.
them either to the five, just to show that
Oh,
there
that's
is,
cool.
yeah. So usually I do try to work in comparison to the native language or
Mhm.
just to the five neutral vowels, a, e, I, o, u, and then show the difference and then organize it in the mouth. So this could be my starting point. But when it comes to teaching pronunciation and separate sounds, then there is no necessary, like I don't necessarily teach according to IPA. I do attach it so people know that
Mhm.
this is the sound.
Yeah.
And I agree. Like I think some people love it and it's a lot easier for them. And
Well, I
others
think
don't.
someone's saying here what you were talking about. I understood much better IPA after a while practicing pronunciation and prosody. Yeah, I think that's
Mm,
exactly what we're
yeah.
talking about here. Yeah, I mean, one thing I do is, I've found just marking again, syllable stress, word stress,
Yeah.
in general. I mean, we can say it changes, but it doesn't change as much as intonation. Or if you want to contrast that, you say, okay, it can change, but this is the basic
Yeah.
way it works in these sentences is just huge, because if they're looking at it and seeing it while they're hearing it. And I say to students, it's you can be on the subway and do this, right? So you don't have to say out loud, right? If you're following rhythm, like I don't know, we did a WH question, we do something else like I thought I already told you that story. Like if you're reading a book, one of my stories or somebody else's where I'm putting the stress, you can be on the subway, man. I thought I already told you, you don't have to say I thought on the subway. You can be like,
Yeah.
like
Use your body
yeah, because
to
the
yeah.
speaking it will help you with your fine tuning your pronunciation. But if you're following the rhythm, you're listening. I mean, a word we haven't
Yeah.
really, I think, hasn't come up today. But right, but like that's the rhythm is the key to English listening, because without it, that's why it's like students would be like, oh,
Yes.
there must have been so
Oh
many
my God,
idioms in
yes.
that conversation, or that TOEIC thing was so hard. I had all this vocabulary I didn't notice. Like, here's the script. Like, what? There was nothing new.
Right.
It was the way the rhythm made it difficult to understand those words.
And I think understanding rhythm is really is key for comprehension and listening, because you really don't have to listen or understand every single word.
Everything.
Like
That's
if
right.
people change the way they listen, it would make their lives a lot easier.
Fluent listening. Fluent
Yeah.
listening. Yeah. Great.
All right. I'm gonna take Victoria's question. How do you
Cool.
get, and then you're gonna take another question.
Okay.
How do you get comfortable with teaching pronunciation and practicing shadowing together with your students? Because sometimes it gets awkward for the student. Maybe we could both answer it, because I know
Go.
awkward
No,
is
no, yeah.
not an option for your class, right?
Well, no, go ahead.
First of all, you get comfortable by just doing it. The more, like, it's usually awkward at the beginning, and then if we let it be awkward, then it's going to stay awkward. So sometimes just the repetition and like getting used to doing it and understanding the importance of it is something that is going to help them get past it. I always like to talk about emotions and like, why does it feel awkward? Like, what does it make you feel? Are you afraid of making mistakes? Are you afraid of being afraid of being criticized, of being judged right now? Why is that? What happened? And then creating a safer space for them and starting small, right? Like with small, like understanding the student, starting small, giving them positive feedback on what they're doing, whether they're accurate or not accurate. It does not matter. Like, as long as they know that they're on track with practicing, repeating, and then gradually guiding them in the right direction. Doing it with them, definitely. Like, sometimes I would lead them more when I'm practicing with them if I feel that they're insecure, and help them build a little bit more confidence, and then ask them to do it. Yeah.
I mean, for me, it's also like being a little silly about it sometimes. So let's talk about adults, because kids will repeat and shadow anything, and they love, you don't even need a song. You can just, turn it on, turn it off, put it on, take it off, put it down, pick it up, right? You don't need any music, they just want to keep going. But like, I have university students in France who are, pretty conservative in a lot of ways. So a little shy to like do something like, repeat in class or do songs in class. So like, like being kind of silly about it, for me, is really important, because they're not silly themselves. Kids will just be silly with you, but like to kind of make fun of myself or do something like that to get them like, so like start doing like, if I'm doing something with irregular verbs, like, it's irregular verbs like church, everybody repeat, hallelujah. The call and response thing, I do a lot of playing around, because I feel like, and also call and response, not just shadowing, repeating what I said, which is unnatural, but call and response is much more natural, right? Because it's like a conversation. So often it's with a song I have. So instead of doing the song in class, because we don't usually sing songs together unless, we've been friends with people for years, or it's our family, or we've been drinking alcohol, or we're in church, or like all kinds of things that are not a classroom. So again, kids will sing songs, but I definitely, it's about listening at home and, getting hooked on the idea. So you listen yourself, which is how we usually enjoy music.
Right.
So, kids will sing together, but so it's more just about like, having fun with it, and also shadowing me, but also shadowing like actors, famous people, like, so it's not just me, like, putting them on, who can talk the most, like this person, this kind of stuff, I think also helps.
Yeah. And I'm going to say one more thing, Victoria, make sure that you don't catch the awkward feeling yourself, because a lot of times you might feel awkward because they feel awkward, and then that's it. Like, it's going to be hard to move them away from that feeling.
This question, wow, this is a really good one from Will. and this is what I think about a lot in France. How could we help ordinary schools implement these techniques that work? That they're using techniques that don't work. I'm gonna let you do it. I'm just gonna quickly say, just so we don't feel too discouraged, English language teaching, or any language teaching really for that matter, it hasn't been very long when you look at the history of education and teaching languages, that it's thought of more as a communicative thing. So, I mean, when I feel discouraged, I try to remember that. It's like computer science versus like how to use a laptop, right? Or something. Like, it's pretty new. So we're still thinking about it as something that's not, like music or art or computers, just, a skill to go out and use. So it's going to take, it's really a big shift. I think there are people against it. There are people, maybe that don't have enough insight and closed-minded, but I think that's not it as much, right? As it's just been taught a certain way for so long.
I think they're like in this loop of how to measure progress, right? And the way to measure progress is when you control it, like when it's really all about the mistakes and the right and wrong, and you can't measure someone's rhythm, right? You can't and ultimately, if you do that, then it's going to be hard for them to show the parents, to show the board, to show the school, the municipality. So it really goes down to, what's progress, what's power, what's the end goal? Because I remember when I went to school, the end goal was just to pass the test. It wasn't about speaking back in the day. Now it's more about speaking, but they don't have the resources to do it. And unfortunately, it really requires more hours, teaching hours, and smaller groups to be able to do a good job. So it's a resource thing in many cases.
Yeah, I agree with you totally, unless you're talking about really young kids. So like if you have primary school classes, you can do a lot with big group and with music and games and things like that. And if you get them, and this is the key, if you get them, this is not just the key, this is everything. If you get them to do it outside the classroom, because it's never going to be enough time. People are arguing about, should we have them for 3 hours a week or 4 hours a week? I'm like, that's not enough to learn. Like, it's not about 3 or 4 hours. So like if we can get them outside to naturally want to watch cartoons, to play games, right, to do all that stuff, and in the classroom they're getting a certain, then I think what can happen without even trying, it's not, we're not teaching to the test. You could just, if we had like the perfect situation like that with primary school kids, by the time they were 11, 12 years old, I could give them a Cambridge test which included speaking, like the PET or something that included like the B1 speaking, that included speaking. They would do well. Not because they were preparing for that test, but because the things we were doing were all the functional English, all the pronunciation, all the great stuff that they wouldn't have to see that test.
Right.
That would be the way I'd want to do it. And that would be the proof. It's like, look, we didn't even prepare students for this test, but we did all this fun stuff. They built their grammar and vocabulary, and look at they all passed this test.
I think we just need more people with courage to change what they already know, right? Like to do things like that. And I think that it's not enough. Like, we don't see it. And also, I mean, the parents have a responsibility, especially if they, their kids don't speak English in the country they live in.
Right.
They do
and
have
how important is it? It may not be that important.
Right. True. Absolutely.
Let's get another question here for you. Let's both look. There's so many comments. Thank you so much for the wonderful interaction happening in the chat. Yeah, I love this question. It's something you talked about when we spoke before, but what have you learned through the process of teaching others English? I think that's a really interesting one, and great for teachers to hear. I mean, there's a lot of things, I imagine, but
well, I definitely learned about priorities and what's really important. That was, when I first started teaching, I was focusing more on the accuracy and sounding a certain way and teaching it in a way that I've learned in the past. And I think that first of all, and many of my students who are here know that, like, it's not just about the production of the language, it's also what's happening to you inside your head when you are, before you speak, while you speak, and after you speak, right? So I think that aspect is a huge part of speaking a language for adults, mostly. And it has to be addressed. It has to be addressed. So this is something that I have learned. And I really learned that there is no one way of teaching. And it's really important that the students will take ownership over how it is right for them to learn and when it's not right for them to learn, right? When something just doesn't click, it's not their fault. It's just that it's not taught in a way that is intuitive for them or that is right for them or in the way that the brain just gets it. So that is also something that I try to teach my students and give them more freedom to say, okay, this does not work for me. Let me try something else.
Wow. And I have a question for you. I have to ask it because I keep seeing in this chat, new sound, new sound, new sound. I mean, it's great that they like your program, they're learning for it, but I'm seeing some things like new sound is our new lifestyle. Tell us about new sound. What is so special about it?
First
Why
of all,
are these
thank
people
you.
like losing their minds about it?
Well, first of all, it's a huge part of it is the community. We really work at making this process of learning a safe place and create like the healthiest environment to learn and thrive and to connect and speak. And I think that the people who end up joining New Sound and how we create the community in a way that they're able to make those connections online is something that is changing how they feel about themselves, how they feel about English. And also, it really enables them to communicate in a way that is new for them. But also, I really outline a program that covers all those elements that we have spoken about. And a big part of it is the mindset work. So there is all throughout the program, people are making huge shifts in how they think about themselves in English, their identity as a non-native speaker, and, you know, building habits, stepping into that, you know, the identity that they really want to own. And ultimately they're starting to make changes in their lives because a lot of my students are already using English on a regular basis. It's just that
they
they're
want to feel
not
more confident. They want to have clear pronunciation and then wow, and look what it's doing for them as far as connecting with one another and their self-esteem and their outlook on their lives. Wow. I'm so impressed.
And we, you know, a few weeks ago, we had a meetup for the first time in New York, and people came from all around.
Oh yeah.
And it was pretty incredible, and it was really like a family because those connections, when you allow yourself to feel vulnerable and someone is holding space for you, it creates such a deep connection. And then again, English becomes the means. It's not the end. It's not the end goal. Because that's why we need English, to express ourselves, to be ourselves, and to make connections and, you know, change our circumstances.
Yeah. Well, I mean, no adult like the adults here are coming to. It's like English is the first goal. No, it's like, what do they want to do? Who do they want to do? English is going to get them. And if somebody like you really cares about that, and then builds a community where everyone's like, oh yeah, me too. I need this. Yeah, it's amazing, really. I'm just sitting here like looking at the comments. As cool as it is to talk to you, it's like it's hard not to just keep reading this. So
it's really the most incredible community in the world. I'm very objective saying that. I know, but
no, but
it's
really great. Well, we need to stop. Yeah, I'm not surprised. Guys, that you're feeling like you found where you want to be with Hadar Hamesh. It's really great. I'm really so privileged to be able to talk to you like this. It's just so much fun, and it's always exciting to talk to teachers, but especially cool to talk to you, I have to say.
I feel the same. Thank you so much, Jason. And I'm so I'm so excited about all the things that you do, and I think it is so valuable, and I would love to think of, you know, I think your teaching should go all over the world.
Well, it does in its own
Spread
way.
yeah, it does. It does. It does.
It's just in
Classrooms
a little,
all over the world.
a little bit different way. Yeah, yeah. But if you ever need a rap, if you ever need me to make a rhyme about what you're doing or any of the material you're making, I'd love to do one.
I already have ideas. So,
Okay, cool. Yeah,
yes.
that'd be fun. That's my passion. That's my passion. So I'll be
Amazing.
happy to. All right. Well, listen, thanks so much, Hadar. Have a really good evening and good days ahead. And to the Hadar community here, to the New Sound community, thank you so much for coming and for your support. And take care, everybody. Thanks, American TESOL.
Thank you so much.
Take care. Bye-bye, everybody.